Hello student, in this video we will see chapter number 9, that is heredity and evolution. So in this chapter we will going to cover a types of variation topic. In that there is two types, somatic variation and gametic variation. Accumulation of variation during the reproduction. In that also variation in asexual reproduction and variation in sexual reproduction. Later on we will see about the importance of variation, why the variation is necessary for the survival purpose. Then Mendel and his work on inheritance. So in that 7 pairs of contrasting characteristic in garden pea, and then Mendel's experimental material. In that we will study about the monohybrid cross and the dihybrid cross. In monohybrid cross, the pure, or you can say the homozygous condition, and heterozygous condition means the hybrid one. In that the two or more than two characteristics are there, and in pure homogeneous condition only the one character is there, pure one that. Then observation of monohybrid cross and the conclusion after this experiment, what kind of plant that we get, that observation of monohybrid cross, and then after according to the observation the conclusion part is there. Then after the dihybrid cross, in that we will study about the phenotypic ratio, observation and conclusion part, and how do these traits means the characteristic, how these all the characteristic is get expressed in the next generation, that we will study. Then the next main topic, that is of sex determination. We will study the sex determination in various animals as well as in human beings. Then after the factors which is responsible for the sex determination and the role of sex chromosome for the sex determination, that we will study. Then later on the evolution part. In that we will study about the three kinds of situation. In the first situation, there is a group of red and the green beetles, whereas in second situation, the group of red and the blue beetles. Whereas in situation 3, the group of red beetles and brushes, and later on we will discuss about acquired and inherited traits, and also we will compare both the traits, means the acquired traits and the inherited traits, what is the difference between these both of traits, then ways by which the speciation takes place, means the factor which is effect on the speciation, and which kind of ways by which the speciation is occur. So in that a gene flow, genetic drift, natural selection and geographical isolation. That 4 point we will discuss. Later on we will study about the evolution and the classification, what kind of evidence that we get which is interrelated to the evolution of the species. Then age of fossil, how can we determine the age of the fossils, and then the evolution by the stages, means the step-by-step evolution. Then the evolution by the artificial selection, in that the molecule phylogeny and how the human evolution is occurred, that we will discuss in this chapter. Now let's start with the introduction part. The genetic deals with the study of heredity and the variation. Genetics deals means the whatever the character, means the DNA will store all the information, and that information is passed from one generation to another generation. While this passing this characteristic or traits to one generation to another generation, there is some change, there is some differences occur. And due to this difference, the variation is occur. Heredity means whatever the characteristic possessed by the parent, that characteristic is transferred to their offspring. And that transmission of this character, or you can say the traits from one generation to another generation, that is called the heredity. And the variation means while this transferring of the characteristic or traits from one generation to another generation, at that time there is some differences occur in characteristic. So due to that, the variation is goes. The genetic deals with the study of heredity and variation. The transmission of characteristic traits from one generation to the next generation is called the heredity. The next one, that the difference between the characteristic, different between the character, or you can say the characteristic or the traits. Traits means character only. So between the parent and the offspring, that is called the variation. And this kind of variation is generally occur in a sexual reproduction, not in a chance of a variation is very less in asexual reproduction, because in that only the single parent is participate. But in a sexual reproduction, there is a chance of variation is occur, because in the sexual reproduction there is a two organism are taking part in the reproduction process. So whatever the next generation is arrived, that possess the different character from their parents. So due to that, the changing of the traits is occur, and that is called the variation. And these all things we already learn in a reproduction chapter, that the variation, the what is the connection between the variation and the sexual reproduction, and which is the best for the variation, sexual reproduction or the asexual reproduction. Then the answer is sexual reproduction, because in a sexual reproduction the chances of variation is more than the asexual reproduction. Now let's see the next topic, the types of variation. The next topic is types of variation. The variation are of two types. The first one, that somatic variation, and the second one, that is of gametic variation. Variation are of two types, somatic variation and gametic variation. Let's discuss about the somatic variation. The somatic variation means it is takes place in a body. It is takes place in the body cell, and it is neither inherited or nor transmitted. Means it is not passed from one generation to the another generation. It is only takes place in the body cell, and it is neither inherited nor transmitted. Inheritance means it is not transferred from one generation to the another generation. So that is also known as acquired traits. Acquired traits means after the birth, whatever the changes is occur in the body, that is we consider as acquired traits. For example, if you are cutting the tails of dog, so that is after the birth, whatever the changes occur, that is occurring after the birth. So that kind of change or that kind of variation we can consider as a somatic variation. Same like in human beings. The lady cut out their hair, long hair. It transformed herself by the changing of their hairstyle. So that is also comes under to that acquired traits. Means whatever the change that is occur in a after the birth, and which is not passed from one generation to the another generation, that we consider as a somatic variation. Let's see the characteristic somatic variation. It is takes place in the body cell. It is neither inherited nor transmitted. It is also known as acquired traits. As I told you, acquired traits means after the birth, whatever the change we do by the artificial way, that all things comes under to the acquired traits. Whatever the skill that we learn, that also comes under to the acquired traits. For example, the cuttings of tails in a dogs, and the boring of pinna, etc. So this is the example of a somatic variation. Now let's see the next type of variation, that is called the gametic variation. And this gametic variation, that is takes place in a gametes means you can say that a sex cell, or you can say the reproductive cell which is responsible for the reproduction. So that cell we consider as a gametes. As in first sentence already I told you that it is gamete cell means it is a sex cell. It is also known as a reproductive cell. So ultimately it is related to inheritance because it takes part in a reproduction. So we can say that this kind of variation is occur in a inherited as well, means it is also transferred from one generation to another generation. So the inherited as well as it is a transmitted means it passed through one generation to the another generation. That's why it is also known as the inheritance traits. For example, the human height, skin color, that is also passed to their offspring. If the parents who possess a very fair skin color, so that is also passed in the next generation, or you can say the offspring. The whatever the babies came, that is also in a white in color, fair in color. So that kind of change, that kind of variation that we consider in a gametic variation. Gametic variation means it is takes place in the gametes. Gamete means a sex cell. You can also say it like a reproductive cell. And as we know that the gamete is responsible for the reproduction, and the reproduction it is connected to the inheritance. Inheritance means the characteristic which is passed from parent to their offspring, that is called the inheritance, and whatever the character, that is called the inherit character. So in the gametic variation which is takes place in the gametes and the reproductive cell, in a inheritance which is inheritance, and as well as it is a transmitted from one generation to another generation. It is also known as a inherited traits. As I told you, it is passed from one to another generation. That's why it is also known as a inheritance trait. For example of gametic variation, the human height, skin color, these all things is comes under to the gametic variation. Let's see one more time from the beginning. In introduction part, there is a two definition came. It's also important. The heredity definition. Heredity means the transmission of characteristic, or you can say the traits, from the one generation to the next generation is called the heredity. The another definition, that is of variation. Variation means the difference in the character, or you can say the traits between the parent and their offspring is called the variation. Now the next topic is the types of variation. The variation is mainly two types. The first one, that is somatic variation, and the second one, that is a gametic variation. Let's see the first one, that is somatic variation. Somatic variation, it is takes place in the body cell, and it is neither inherited or not transmitted, means it is not passed from one generation to another generation. That's why it is, we can say that the somatic variation is neither inherited or nor transmitted. And it is also known as the acquired traits because the organism acquired after the birth. That kind of variation is acquired after the birth. But so that kind of variation change, that is also known as acquired traits. Acquired traits, and that comes under to the somatic variation. For example of somatic variation is the cutting of tails in a dog, the boring of pinna, etc. So this is the comes under to the somatic variation, which is not passed from one generation to another generation. Whatever we skill learn, for example, driving a car, then cutting off our hair, changing hairstyle, do the makeup and look fat. So these all the things is comes under to the somatic variation, and these all character that we consider as acquired traits. Means it is not by birth. After the birth we acquire it. That's why it is known as acquired traits. And this kind of variation that comes under to the somatic variation. Now let's see the next type of variation, that is of a gametic variation. As per the name also we can come to know that the gametic variation means it is related to gametes. Means it is a definitely inheritance. The gametic variation which is takes place in the gametes, as I told you that the gametes means it is a sex cell which is responsible for the reproduction, and that's why it is also known as a reproductive cell that takes place in the gametes, reproductive cell, and it is a inheritant as well as it is also transmitted, means whatever the character who possess the parents that also transfer to their offspring due to this gamete. And whatever the change that occurs in gametes that also transfer into their offspring. So this kind of change, this kind of variation we consider as a gametic variation, and it is an inheritant one, so it is comes under to, or you can say it is also known as a inheritant traits. For example of inheritant traits is human height, skin color, that comes under to the gametic variation. Now let's see the next topic, the accumulation of variation during a reproduction. The variation occurs during the reproduction whether the organism multiplies sexually or asexually. First of all, we discuss about the asexual reproduction, the variation which is occur in asexual reproduction. So the variation are feeble and occur due to the small inaccuracy in a DNA copy, means you can consider it as a mutation. Mutation means due to the some reason, due to the some natural phenomena or natural disaster, there is a changes occur in a DNA copying, and due to that the mutation is occur, and due to that mutation the variation is occur. So the variation are fever and is occur due to the small inaccuracy in a DNA copying, and that is called the mutation. So if I ask that write down the variation in asexual reproduction, that the variation are very fewer and it is occurred due to the small inaccuracy in a DNA copy, and that is called the mutation. Due to the mutation, the variation in a DNA copying is occur, and due to that the character, you can see the different character from the previous one, means the variation is occur. Now the next one, that the variation in sexual reproduction, how the variation is occur. The variation is large because in a sexual reproduction there is a two organism participate, male and the female. So the chances of variation, the chances of difference is a very large than the chances of asexual reproduction, because in asexual reproduction only the one organism is taking part, so the variation chance is very less. But in case of a sexual reproduction, the variation chance is very large, because here the two participant are participate in the process of reproduction, male and the female. So both have their own character, and due to this both the character, the new offspring is generated. So the difference between the parent and the offspring, the change difference is a more. So we can say that the variation are very large, and it is occur due to the crossing over, the separation of chromosome, and the due to the mutation as well. In sexual reproduction, the variation are large, occur due to the crossing over, the separation of chromosome and mutation. Let's see one more time. The variation occurring during the reproduction, whether the organism multiplies sexually or asexually. If you are talking about the asexual reproduction, then the variation are fewer. Fewer means very less. In some time you can see the variation. It is not a naturally, or it is not a regularly. You can observe the variation because only the single organism is taking part in a asexual reproduction. So the very chances of variation is very less, and this variation is generally occur due to the mutation process. Mutation process means due to the some natural disaster, there is a little bit changes occur during the DNA copying, and due to that there is a changes, you can observe the changes in the next offspring. So that comes under to the asexual reproduction. Now let's talk about the variation in sexual reproduction. The variation are large. You can observe that, as I told you, that in sexual reproduction there is a two, male and female, both are taking part, and due to they both have their own characteristic, and due to this, the next whatever the offspring is come, they possess the both the character, means the chances of variation, it is a very large as compared to the asexual reproduction. And this variation is mainly occurred due to the crossing over and the separation of chromosome, and also by the mutation. Now let's see the importance of variation, why the variation is necessary, what is the importance of variation. The depending upon the nature or a variation is different individual would have a different kind of advantages. For example, the bacteria that can be withstand heat will survive better in a heat wave as well. The importance of variation means if the variation is occurred, due to that the evolution is occurred, and due to that they are adopted the new thing, due to that the new variation is occurred, and these new adapted thing are able to survive in adverse condition too. So here you can see that the depending upon the nature of various variation, different individual would have a different kind of advantages. For example, the bacteria that can be withstand heat will survive better in a heat wave. Then the main advantages of a variation to species is that it increases the chance of a survival in a changing environment. The second most important things, or you can say the importance of variation, is about the survival purpose. Means the main advantage of a variation to species is that to increase the chances of survival in a changing of environment. And the next one, that the free air lobes are attached. Ear lobes are two variants found in a human population. The free ears lobe and the attached ear lobes are two variants found in a human population. So this is also an example of variation. Let's see one more time the importance of variation. The depending upon the nature of variation, different individual would have a different kind of advantages. Which kind of advantages that we will discuss? For example, the bacteria that can withstand heat will survive better in a heat wave. The another main advantages of the variation is to a species is that it is increase the chance of its survival in a changing of their environment. Main advantages of variation to a species is that it is increase the chance of a survival in a changing of environment. The next important point, that a free earlobe means at the bottom of the ear. Some of the human beings have a joint, that lobe is joint one, and some of the have a free ear, means it is not joined from the lower portion. So the free earlobes and attached earlobes are the two variants means found in a human population. In next video we will see about the Mendel's and his work on inheritance. I hope you all are understand this chapter and kindly write down the exercise whatever the chapter that that we have finished, and I already keep the study material and also the question answer in the study material. So kindly go through it and write down it well in your fair notebook. In next video we will discuss about the Mendel and his work on inheritance, which kind of experiment the Mendel did and what kind of work is occur on inheritance, that we will discuss in a next video. Thank you.